Many people quietly ask themselves this question: why is it so hard for me to say no? Sometimes the word itself feels simple. It's only two letters. But when the moment arrives, when someone asks you for something, such as a favor, your time, your energy, saying no can suddenly feel very uncomfortable. You might feel pressure to explain, and you might soften your response. You might say yes, even when something inside you knows you're already stretched too thin. And then afterward, you may find yourself feeling drained, not because you wanted to help, but because you felt like you couldn't say no. And now, if that experience feels familiar, this is something many people quietly notice. There's usually a deeper reason why the word no can feel so difficult for some people. Hello, everyone. I'm Janine Naus, your grief and trauma relief specialist, and I'm really glad you're here with me today. So, whether you're joining live or watching the replay, in today's session, the healing step session, we're going to explore why saying no can feel uncomfortable for trauma survivors and how the nervous system learns to associate boundaries with risk and how to begin rebuilding a sense of safety around saying no. To understand why this happens, we first need to look at how the nervous system learns to protect relationships. So once we ask the question, why is it so hard for me to say no? The first thing to understand is that this reaction often isn't about willpower. For many trauma survivors, the difficulty with saying no is connected to how the nervous system learned to protect relationships. In earlier environments, saying no may have felt neutral. It may have been met with disappointment, frustration, criticism, or emotional withdrawal. And sometimes the response was subtle. It was a shift in tone, a sigh, a look of disapproval. But the nervous system notices these things very quickly, and over time it begins forming a quiet association. Saying no could create tension in the relationship. And when that association forms repeatedly, the body begins to treat the moment of saying no as a potential risk of connection. So instead of responding freely, the nervous system starts scanning the situation. And it asks questions like, will they be upset? Will they think I'm selfish? Will they will this create conflict? And if your system has learned that tension in relationships can feel unsafe, it may try to avoid that tension altogether. And that's when saying yes can become the easier response, even when something inside you feels hesitant. Not because you want to overextend yourself, but because your nervous system is trying to preserve connection and stability. And at some point in your life, that response may have helped prevent conflict or emotional distance. So your system learns something important. Keeping the peace protects the relationship. But over time, always protecting the relationship in that way can begin to come at a cost. Because every time you say yes when your body needed space, your own energy becomes a little more depleted. And that leads us into the next layer of this pattern. Why many people begin feeling responsible for how others react when they set boundaries. So once the nervous system begins associating saying no with tension in relationships, another layer often develops. Many people begin feeling a strong sense of responsibility for how others might react. And if someone asks for something, your time, your help, your availability, and you imagine saying no, your mind may quickly jump ahead to the other person's possible response. And you might picture them feeling disappointed or frustrated or hurt. And when that happens, something inside you may immediately try to prevent that discomfort. And you might soften your answer. You might explain more than necessary. You might try to make the request work even when it doesn't really fit your capacity. Because somewhere along the way, the nervous system may have learned something important. Other people's disappointment feels like something I should avoid. Now, for many trauma survivors, disappointment in relationships didn't always feel manageable, and it may have led to tension, distance, or even criticism. So the body learns to anticipate it before it happens. And instead of simply deciding what works for you, the mind begins calculating how your response might affect the other person. And the moment you imagine someone feeling upset, your system may move quickly to smooth things over. And that's where people pleasing patterns often begin. Not because you don't have preferences or limits, but because your nervous system is trying to protect the relationship from discomfort. And then over time, this can make the word no feel much heavier than it actually is. It no longer feels like a simple boundary. And it can start to feel like a moment that might create emotional consequences for something else. And when the nervous system perceives those consequences as risky, it naturally tries to avoid them. But here's an important shift that many people find relieving once they begin to see it clearly. See, disappointment is a normal part of relationships. It doesn't automatically mean the relationship is unsafe or damaged or even at risk. And learning to tolerate that moment of disappointment without immediately trying to fix it is part of rebuilding a healthier relationship with boundaries. Which brings us to the final piece of this conversation: how to begin rebuilding a sense of safety around saying no. So once we begin to understand where this pattern comes from, the next step is not forcing yourself to suddenly say no more often. For many people, that approach actually creates more stress in the nervous system. And instead, the goal is to begin rebuilding a sense of safety around boundaries. And when the nervous system has learned that saying no might create tension in relationships, it may take time for the body to recognize that boundaries can exist without causing harm. So, a helpful place to begin is with awareness. Notice what happens in your body in the moment when someone asks something of you. And you might feel a tightening in the chest, a sense of urgency to respond quickly, or the feeling that you need to give an answer right away. That urgency is often the nervous system trying to prevent possible discomfort. Well, one small shift can create more space in that moment. So instead of responding immediately, you can begin allowing yourself a pause. And you might say something like, "Let me think about that." Or, "I'll need to check my schedule and get back to you." And that pause gives your nervous system time to move out of reaction and into choice. And over time, as your system experiences moments where boundaries are expressed without damaging relationships, something begins to change. The word no slowly becomes less threatening, not because relationships stop mattering to you, but because your nervous system learns that connection does not require constant self sacrifice. And you can care about others, you can value relationships, and still protect your own time, energy, and capacity. Rebuilding that sense of safety takes patience, but each moment of awareness begins teaching the body something new. Your needs can exist alongside connection. And that brings us to how we gently close today's conversations. So, if you've ever asked yourself, why is it so hard for me to say no? I want you to hear something clearly. For many people, this difficulty did not develop because they were weak or because they didn't know what they needed. In many cases, the nervous system learned that maintaining harmony in relationships helped things feel calmer and safer. And when that learning happens repeatedly, the body begins protecting relationships by avoiding moments that might create tension. And at some point in your life, saying yes may have helped prevent conflict, disappointment, or emotional distance. So your nervous system remembers that. But constantly saying yes when your body needs rest or space or capacity can slowly become exhausting. Your needs and your boundaries are not a threat to healthy connection. In fact, over time, learning to express them can actually create more balanced and honest relationships. I want to thank you for joining me in today's Healing Step session and for taking a few minutes to look at something many people struggle with quietly. Now, if this conversation brought recognition for you, even in a small way, that awareness is an important step. And if you've ever liked a calm, private space to explore where saying no feels difficult in your own life, I offer healing clarity sessions. And these are gentle one-on-one conversations as and and there's no just diagnosing or fixing involved because I'm a life coach, not a therapist. There's simply a steady place to explore patterns like this and begin rebuilding a sense of safety around boundaries. Now, there's no urgency and no pressure, just support when you feel ready. And remember, protecting your time, energy, and emotional capacity does not make you selfish. It helps create healthier relationships, including the one you have with yourself. So I want to thank you for being here today, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye bye.